Okay, fantastic. But maybe before you share your screen, I can just tell everyone who you are.
Great.
And then we can get started. Let's close this. Okay, fantastic. Well, Kim, thank you so much for being with us today. This is the third time that you're talking with INKOMOCO and our entrepreneurs. We're so happy. Right now, just to let you know who's in the room, we have about 300 staff at INKOMOCO spread throughout Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia. And we also have a network of about 50,000 micro and small businesses across those three countries. And reading your books, both Radical Candor and Just Work, have been really influential for us as an organization as we've continued to grow. And the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you today was so that we can help sort of share some of those learnings and insights, as well as ask a bunch of other questions, so that many of the people who've joined our team and also many of the entrepreneurs will also be able to benefit from your tremendous thoughts and work. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Where are you today?
You're finding me in my bedroom in Los Altos Hills, California. So that is where I am. And I want to thank you for having me. And I want to thank each and every one of you for the work you do. It is incredibly inspiring and important work. And if I can help in any small way, it would be my great pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for that. Now, in a few minutes, we'll get to sort of the content, especially of Radical Candor. But maybe before we even get there, I mean, you've had such a varied career, over your life and in many different geographies. And why don't you sort of I hate sort of reading people's bios, especially when there's an opportunity for the person to speak for themselves. So maybe in your own words, if you could just give everybody sort of that top line, how did you start and how did you get here?
Yeah. Well, it was a long and winding road. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and I went to college and studied Russian literature in college. And as you know, because I love the books,
Yeah.
why else would one study Russian literature? And also because I was very interested in arms control,
Mm.
and I was very worried about sort of the fate of the earth. And then the Berlin Wall fell when I was a senior in college, and the whole problem seemed to have gone away. And so I wound up working on military conversion projects for a financial management company that was investing in these Soviet defense plants that were converting to civilian production. So tanks, starting to make tractors, that
Mm.
sort of thing. And then the coup happened, and the company put its money in China, but I wanted to stay in Moscow, and I wound up working for a diamond cutting
Mm.
company and starting a diamond cutting factory. And that was actually my very first management experience. And what I learned from these people was that what they wanted was a boss who gave a damn. That was
Mm.
the thing that I had to offer that the state didn't offer. The state couldn't give a damn, but I, as a
Mm.
human being, could. And that all of a sudden made me think maybe management was more interesting. So I went to business school, and then I worked for the federal communicate. I worked for the government for a year
Mm.
after business school. Definitely the only person in my class to do that. And then I wound up joining a couple of failed startups and learning a ton about management at those
Yeah.
failed startups, but feeling kind of discouraged after failing a couple of times. And then I took a job at Google, and that worked out a lot better for me. So that was, and I learned more about management there. And then I woke up one morning and realized the thing that I really cared about my job at Google was not cost per click. That was actually kind of boring, but the building the team and the management aspect. And a professor of mine from business school had joined this thing called Apple University, and Steve Jobs decided he wanted to throw away all their management
Mm.
training and start from a blank piece of paper. And so I went there and worked with the team to design and teach a class called Managing at Apple.
Mm.
Meanwhile, this is a long story, sorry. But a
No,
friend
it's
of
fascinating. I mean, it's how we got to where we are, right? And
yeah,
it's so many different entry points, right?
yeah,
You're not at Google without diamond cutting. You're not
yeah,
at diamond cutting without reading books, in
without
Russian,
reading Tolstoy. Yeah,
right?
exactly. Exactly. So anyway, I wound up helping a friend of mine design who was at Google, who then became CEO of Twitter. I helped him design managing at Twitter, and lo and behold, managing at Twitter looked exactly like managing at Apple, looked exactly like managing at Google, which looks like managing really anywhere. And that was what made me decide to write the book Radical Candor, and that's where I am today.
So that's super fascinating, and it sounds like all of your experiences were really sort of different in terms of the stage of the organization, the size of the team, arguably like what was at stake, right,
Yeah.
through sort of management. Um, and one of the things that I was always thinking about when I was reading Radical Candor first, and thinking about how that might apply to some of the organizations and entrepreneurs who we work with, who are also at this, like, there's a spectrum of stage of their business development, right? Can radical candor like apply anywhere at any stage in business?
I think so. I mean, the company that I started to help organizations roll out the ideas is 6 people. So
Okay.
it's a very small company, and we put the ideas. We're not radical candor hypocrites. We use it, and it helps us. And we also work with Fortune 50 companies that have hundreds of thousands of employees.
Yeah.
So, it feels different. It's a little bit easier, I think, in a small company. It's always easier to be radically candid with a small group of people whose names you know than it
Right.
is with a big organization. But it certainly is possible to put in place management systems that are designed to reinforce radical candor. It's also, unfortunately, possible to put in place management systems that that prevent radical candor. So we want to do more of the former and less of the latter.
Well, because I could ask a thousand questions about the specifics of radical candor, but before we get into those, why don't we actually give everybody a chance to learn a little bit more about what we're talking about? So let me hand it over to you to sort of take us through radical candor, the concepts and tips for us to apply in our own businesses.
Great. Well, I'm a visual learner, so I'm going to share some slides with you about
Fantastic.
radical candor. But even more than a visual learner, I'm a storyteller. So I'm going to
Hmm.
start by telling a story about a moment when my boss criticized me. Not because radical candor is all about the boss criticizing the employee. It should always start, no matter where you are in the hierarchy, with soliciting feedback, especially if you're the boss. But I'll tell this story because these are the moments that pack an emotional punch.
Right.
I had just started a new job at Google, and I had to give a presentation to the founders and the CEO about how the AdSense business was doing. And I walked into the room, and there in one corner of the room was one of the founders on an elliptical trainer, stepping away wearing toe shoes and a bright blue spandex unitard, super tight. Not what I was expecting or wanting, frankly, to see in the room. And there in the other corner of the room was the CEO doing his email. It was like his brain had been plugged into his machine. And probably
Hmm.
like all of you in such a situation, I felt a little bit nervous. How was I supposed to get these people's attention? Luckily for me, the AdSense business was on fire. And when I said how many new customers we had added over the last couple of months, the CEO almost fell off his chair. What did you say? This is incredible. Do you need more marketing dollars, more engineering resources? So I'm feeling like the meeting's going all right. In fact, I now believe that I am a genius. And I walked out of the room. I walked past my boss. I'm expecting a high five, a pat on the back. And instead, she says to me, "Why don't you walk back to my office with me?" And I thought, oh, wow, I messed something up in there. And I'm sure I'm about to hear about it.
Yeah.
And I was open to hearing about it, by the way, because she had started by soliciting feedback from me. She had shown me that she viewed it as a gift, not a punishment. But still, I was a little nervous. She began by telling me not what had gone wrong in the meeting, but what had gone well in the meeting. But of course, all I wanted to hear about was what I had done, where I had messed up. And eventually she said to me, "You said a lot in there. Were you aware of it?" And with this, I sort of breathed a huge sigh of relief and I made kind of a brush off gesture with my hand and said, "Oh, yeah, I know. It's a verbal tic. It's no big deal." And then she said to me, "I know this great speech coach. I bet Google would pay for it. Would you like an introduction?" And once again, I made this brush off gesture with my hand. I said, "I am busy. I don't have time for a speech coach." And then she stopped. She looked me right in the eye and she said, "I can tell when you do that thing with your hand. I'm going to have to be a lot more direct with you.
Hmm.
When you say every third word, it makes you sound stupid." Now she's got my full attention. And some people might say it was mean of her to say I sounded stupid, but if she hadn't used just those words with me, and by the way, this is a really important point, she never would have used those words with other people on her team who were perhaps a better listener than I
Hmm.
was. But she knew me well enough to know that if she didn't use just those words with me, she wasn't going to get through to me. And it was the kindest thing she could have done for me at that moment in my career because she was not exaggerating. I literally said every third word. And this was news to me because I had been giving presentations my whole career. I thought I was pretty good at it. And
Right,
it was
right.
almost like I suddenly realized that I had a giant hunk of spinach between my teeth and nobody had had the common courtesy to tell me. And so I thought about it. As I thought about it, I thought, why had no one told me? But also, what was it about her management style that made it so seemingly easy for her to tell me?
Hmm.
And as I thought about her management style, I realized it really boiled down to two pretty basic things. She cared about me, not just as an employee, but as a human being. And she was willing to challenge me directly. Now, that may not seem so radical, that combination, that I would call it radical candor. And yet, everyone I've ever worked with in my career has really struggled with giving feedback at work.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing, I did not learn anything about management at business school, but I did learn at business school that all of life's hardest problems can be boiled down to a good 2x2 framework. So here is your feedback framework: care personally and challenge directly. It's worth sort of taking a beat for each aspect. First of all, care personally. This is what I think of as the give a damn dimension of radical candor. And it's interesting to think about what moves us down on this dimension because we, we really, I've never met anyone who says, "Oh, I don't care about other people, so I'm going to be a great leader, great boss, great employee, great peer." That's not what most people are actually pretty nice people.
Right.
I think the thing that moves us down happens when we're about 18, 19, 20 years old. We're right at that moment when in our lives when our egos are maximally fragile and our personas are beginning to solidify. And right at that moment, someone will say to us, "Be professional." And I think
Mm.
often, without even realizing what we're doing, we translate that to mean as leave who you really are, leave your emotions, leave your humanity, leave everything that's best about you at home and show up at work like some kind of robot. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't possibly care personally if you're showing up at work like some kind of robot. So you really want to be more than just professional. I'm not saying be unprofessional, but you need to build real human relationships at work. And when you're lucky, you even love the people who you work with. Love in the true sense of collegiality.
You spend a lot
However,
of time with them.
yeah, you spend more time with the people at work than just about any other place.
Yeah.
However, love is not all you need. The Beatles got that wrong. You also need this challenge directly dimension. And this is the thing that this is like the willing to piss people off part of radical candor, which none of us are willing to do. And I think the problem here begins when we are 18 months old, not 18 years old. And we have a parent. I don't know if there's a similar saying in Rwanda, but in this country, our parents are always saying, "If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all."
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, it is your job to say it. And this is really hard. It's really hard. That's what makes radical candor. This be professional training and this, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all training. So one of the things I've done to try to make it a little bit easier is to give words to what happens when we fail on one dimension or another. Sometimes we challenge directly, but we forget to show that we care personally. And this I call obnoxious aggression. In the first draft of the book, I called this the asshole quadrant because it seemed more radically candid, but I stopped doing that for a really important reason. I found that when I did that, people would use this framework and they'd start writing names in boxes. And I beg of you, please don't use this framework that way. These are mistakes that all of us make every
Yeah.
single day. Use this like a compass to drive conversations with specific people to a better place. Now, obnoxious aggression is a big problem. It's a problem because it hurts other people. It's also a problem because it's inefficient. Because when you hurt someone else, they go into fight or flight mode, and then they literally cannot hear what you're saying. So you're wasting your breath. There's also a third problem with obnoxious aggression, which is, I don't know about you all, but for me, when I realize I've acted like a jerk, it's not actually my instinct to move the right way on the care personally dimension. Instead, it's my instinct to go the wrong way on challenge directly. And then I wind up in the very worst place of all, manipulative insincerity. This is where passive aggressive behavior, political behavior, all of the worst kinds of workplace behavior creep in. If obnoxious aggression is front stabbing, manipulative insincerity is backstabbing. And when we talk about things going wrong at work, we tend to talk about obnoxious aggression or manipulative insincerity because that's where the drama is. But in my experience, that's not where the majority of mistakes happen. In my experience, the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes in this last quadrant, where we do remember to show that we care personally, because again, most people are actually pretty nice people, but we're so worried about not hurting someone's feelings or offending them that we fail to tell them something they'd be better off knowing in the long run. And this I call ruinous empathy. So what I want to do for the next couple of minutes is sort of tell you a couple of stories to get on the same page about what I mean by these terms. For me, the origin story of Radical Candor happened in the space of time it took a light to change on the streets of Manhattan. I had just gotten a puppy, and I love this puppy. I love this puppy so much that I had never said a cross word to her. And as a result, she was totally out of control. So I'm taking her for a walk. She jumps in front of a speeding car. I pulled her out of the way in the nick of time. And this man, a perfect stranger, looked at me and he said, "I can tell you really love that dog." That was all he had to do to move up on the care personally dimension. He didn't have to remember my name or know my birthday or know my kids' names or take me out to lunch. All he had to do was notice my humanity in the moment. This does not have to take a long time. But he said to me, "You're going to kill that dog if you don't teach her to sit." And then he pointed at the ground with this kind of harsh gesture and he said, "Sit." The dog sat. I had no idea she even knew what that meant. I kind of looked up at him in amazement. And he said, "It's not mean, it's clear." And then he walked off, leaving me with words to live by. So especially if you feel like you're struggling with ruinous empathy, "It's not mean, it's clear" is a good thing to keep top of mind. However, if you feel like you're struggling with obnoxious aggression, you really want to focus on truly being kind. You need a different mantra. And make sure that when you realize you've acted like a jerk, which you are bound to, all of us sometimes act like a jerk, that you go the right way on care personally, not the wrong way on manipulative insincerity, because then you wind up in the worst place of all. Now, last but not least, in order to explain to you what I mean by ruinous empathy, I want to tell you a story about possibly the most painful moment of my career. I had just hired this guy, we'll call him Bob. And I liked Bob a lot. He would do things like, we were at a manager offsite playing one of those endless get to know you games. And Bob was the guy who had the courage to raise his hand and to say, "I can tell everybody's really stressed out. and would rather get back to work. I've got an idea. It'll be really fast. Let's
Hmm.
just go around the table and confess what candy our parents used when potty training us. Really weird, but really fast. Weirder yet, we all remembered. My parents used Hershey Kisses. And then for the next 10 months, every time there was a tense moment in a meeting, Bob would whip out just the right piece of candy for the right person at the right moment. So Bob was quirky, but he brought a little levity to the office. Everybody loved Bob. One
Mhm.
problem with Bob, he was doing terrible work. I was so puzzled. I couldn't understand what was going on because he had this incredible resume. I learned much later that he was missing some details, perhaps because he was smoking pot in the bathroom 3 times a day, which maybe explained all that candy that he had on hand. But I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew is he was handing stuff into me with shame in his eyes.
Mm.
And I would say something to him along the lines of, "Oh, Bob, you're so awesome. You're so smart. Everybody loves working with you. Maybe you could make it just a little bit better," which of course he never did. So let's double click here. Why did I say something so banal to Bob? I think part of it was truly ruinous sympathy. I really did like Bob and I didn't want to hurt his feelings. But if I'm honest with myself, part of what was going on was manipulative insincerity as well, because Bob was popular and Bob was sensitive. And
Mhm.
I was afraid that if I told Bob in no uncertain terms that his work wasn't nearly good enough, that he would get upset. He might even start to cry. And then everyone would think I was a big you know what. So the part of me that was worried about my reputation as a leader and therefore not saying anything was the manipulative insincerity part. The part of me that was worried about Bob's feelings, that was the ruinous empathy part. And that goes on for 10 months. And eventually the inevitable happens. And I realize that if I don't fire Bob, I'm going to lose all my best performers because they are fed up. Their
Yeah.
deliverables are late because his deliverables are late. They're not able to do their best work because they're having to redo his work. And they're going to quit. They're going to go work someplace where they can do their best work. And so I sat down to have a conversation with Bob that I should have begun, frankly, 10 months previously. And when I finished explaining to him where things stood, he kind of pushed his chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?"
Mm.
And as that question was going around in my head with no good answer, he looked at me again and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all
Mhm.
cared about me." And now I realize that by not telling Bob, I thought I was being so nice, but he's now getting fired as a result of it. And even Bob agreed he should go because his reputation on the team was just shot. All I
Mm.
could do in the moment was make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again. And that is really what prompted me to come up with this framework and why I'm talking to you all today, because these mistakes are so painful. It's painful for me, much was for Bob, bad for the whole team, and bad for our ability to succeed. So, what I want to do for the next couple of minutes is talk to you about how to put this idea into practice, because there's a definite order of operations for Radical Candor. I'm going to do Q&A in a minute. So the order of operations, these are the things you can do. You can solicit it. You should always start by soliciting it. Don't dish it out before you prove you can take it. So think about, what is the question you're going to ask? How are you going to ask people to tell you the truth? Because especially when you're the entrepreneur or you're a leader, people are unlikely to give you the feedback that you need to grow and improve
Mhm.
and to know what you're doing wrong. So you need to work on soliciting it. The question I like to ask is, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? But don't write down my question, write down your question. Because if you sound like Kim Scott, people won't believe that you really want the answer. So think about how you're going to solicit it and do it often. If each of you can write down your question, who you're going to ask it of, and when you're going to ask it right now, our time today will be very well spent. Now, having solicited feedback, the next step is to give it, and both praise and criticism. Radical Candor is not all about criticism. The sort of your goal is to paint a picture of what's possible. And praise is a much better tool for that than criticism. And you want to give more praise than criticism. Focus on the good stuff. But you want to give both. The purpose of praise is to let people know what to do more of. The purpose of criticism is to let them know what to do less of. It's not really that complicated. But it's never a monologue. It's not enough to give it. You've got to gauge how it landed. Radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. But how do you know what's going on inside someone else's ear? If they seem sad or mad, that's your cue to move up on the care personally dimension. And if they're kind of brushing you off, that's your cue to move over further than you may be comfortable going on the challenge directly. So be aware of using, you can use this framework, be aware of which vector. Do you need to show you care? Yes, if the person is sad or mad. Do you need to say it a little bit more clearly? Yes, if the person is brushing you off. And I want to reassure you that most of the time this is going to go better than you think. That's what'll usually happen. And last but not least, you want to encourage radical candor. You want to make sure that you are not allowing the people around you to talk badly about others who are not in the room. If someone comes to you complaining about someone else, encourage them to speak directly with that person. Now, I want to leave you with some feedback. I said the most important thing you can do is to solicit it. And I have solicited some feedback. And some of the feedback that I got that was most valuable is the frequency with which bias, prejudice, and bullying masquerade as feedback. And so I want to leave you with a word of caution. Don't allow tainted feedback to stand. Whether you're observing it happen, whether you're the upstander or the leader, or whether it is, if it's directed at you, you want to choose your response. Don't default to silence. It's also useful to disambiguate bias, prejudice, and bullying, because very often we conflate them and we treat them as though they're the same thing when they're actually three different things. So bias, I'm going to offer some simple definitions. Bias is not meaning it. It's an unconscious thought pattern. Prejudice is meaning it, a very consciously held belief, usually reflecting some inaccurate and unfair stereotype. And bullying, there's no belief there, conscious or unconscious at all. It's just being mean. And so thinking about how to respond to each differently is really useful. If it's bias, you want to respond with an I statement. I don't think you meant that the way it sounded. You're sort of holding up a mirror for the other person, and they'll usually change. However, if it's prejudice, holding up a mirror is not going to work, because the other person will smile in the mirror and they'll like what they see. Yeah, that's me. Aren't I good looking? And so you want to make sure that you're using an it statement in the case of prejudice. An it statement can appeal to the law or to an HR policy or to common sense. It is illegal to, it is an HR violation to, or it is ridiculous to. You can use it. An it statement kind of shows the line between one person's freedom to believe whatever they want, but they can't impose those beliefs on others. And last but not least, bullying. In the case of bullying, it's best to use a you statement. If an I statement invites someone in, a you statement pushes them away. You can't talk to me like that, or what's going on for you here, or even a you non sequitur. Where'd you get that shirt? The point is, you are now not accepting what the other person is dishing out at you. You're pushing back a little bit. And I learned this from my daughter when she was in 3rd grade. She was getting bullied. And I was encouraging her to say, I feel sad when you blah, blah. And she banged her fist on the table. And she said, Mom, they are trying to make me feel sad. Why would I tell them they succeeded? I thought that is a really good point.
Right.
So lots more to say about all of this, but I would love to just sort of take some questions now from folks. and hear what you all want to know.
Kim, every time I have the chance to talk with you, I learn so much. And I've read Radical Candor. Now, actually, I've listened to you read Radical Candor a couple of times. And I keep coming back to it, but one of the things that really sort of struck me in this moment, right, was in that origin story of, here you are, you have, by your own sort of gauge, right, you've done a great job. You're now sort of presenting your good work. And at the end of the meeting, your supervisor gives you feedback that isn't directly related to the success that you were presenting, right? And yeah, in the story where she's like, come walk with me, here's some feedback. And you said, you were like, I don't have time for this feedback, so you're brushing it off. Why do you think your manager, why was it important for her to give you that feedback? When maybe at first glance, right, you saying didn't necessarily lead to greater or lesser ad clicks.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the reason why it was important for her to give me that feedback was because she was not so concerned about the business and about the business results. She was concerned about me and my career and what I needed to do to earn credibility at that company with that group of executives. And so I knew that she said that to me because she cared
Mm-hmm.
about me and she wanted to help me succeed. And, she didn't want me to get tripped up by something that I could change. Now, if I had had a speech impediment and I couldn't change it, she wouldn't have given me that
Mm-hmm.
feedback,
Yeah.
right? So that's important context. But it was really, I think, an act of kindness on her part, because it would have been easier for her to say nothing and just say, "Great job, good for you." But it would not have been the right thing for me, and I think that was why I appreciate. And I kind of knew that even at the
Mm-hmm.
time, even though it stung a little bit, and she did, by the way, she did give me praise also. I just didn't, I kind of glossed over that. But she did focus on the good stuff in that meeting. But it was really the criticism that was more helpful.
Well, so for all of the people listening who are managers, who are running around doing 1,000 things at any given point, have KPIs that they need to hit, how is this story an example of a need to have, not a nice to have?
Well, I think that one of the things that she did by telling me that was she helped me be more successful, which helped her be more
Mm-hmm.
successful.
Mm-hmm.
She also earned my trust. She
Okay.
improved our relationship by being willing to say this to me in the moment. And I think that is an important point. I think we often are afraid that offering criticism is going to hurt our relationships.
Mm.
But in this case, it actually really helped our relationship. In fact, I got a note from her just recently
Mm.
saying, uh, we're still in touch. So I think also the thing that is notable about that story and about all the best feedback I've gotten in my career is that it has happened kind of in between things. It did not take extra time for
Mm-hmm.
her. It was fast for her to, she had to walk to the meeting anyway. She just asked me to walk with her. So it didn't take any extra time out of her day. And it didn't cost her anything to do it in terms of money, but it did require emotional discipline. And that's what, I mean, I think the thing that makes radical candor not happen is that most of us anyway are instinctively reluctant to offer that kind of criticism, and also reluctant to keep going when it's necessary. And it's not like it came naturally or easily to my boss. When I was writing the book, I sent her the story,
Mm-hmm.
and she called me up and she said, "Gosh, did I really say you sounded mean and you sounded stupid? That's so mean. I can't believe I." So it was hard for her, but
It
she
wasn't
kind
mean, it was clear.
yeah, it wasn't mean, it was clear, and it wasn't the kind of thing that was easy for her to do or easy even for her to hear, but in the moment, she knew that she had to keep going out on that challenge directly dimension until she reached me.
So on that, where you just mentioned, right, here is some of the most, I would say, an inflection point in your career around sort of getting this particular feedback. But then the story of standing on the street corner, here is a guy who is a complete stranger and who also had this very pivotal moment for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that he was someone who really practiced radical candor? Like, was that something that he had to work on, or he just had that intuition and you just got lucky to stand next to him?
I have no idea because I never saw him again. I have no idea who he was. I think part of it, maybe the reason why it struck me so much is that I grew up in the South of the United States where people tend not to say what they're really thinking. And then
Mhm.
I had moved to New York City where people tend to think what they're say what they're thinking. And so I think part of it may have just, and this is one of the benefits of living in different cultures, is that things really strike you freshly in the culture. So part of it may be that, I don't know, maybe he really loved dogs and he was really worried about my
Right.
dog. And that, I don't know what gave him the motivation to tell this thing to a perfect stranger. But I don't think he was trying to be a jerk or anything. I think he was actually, I think he just was giving me a helpful hint. And, he was standing on the street corner. He didn't have anything else to do.
Right,
He
right.
was waiting for the light. And very often these like little moments in life have such meaning. And if you can remain present for those, I call them moments of management, moments of life. If you can remain present for them and not be so distracted by all the millions of things that are going on in your head, your life can be enormously enriched.
Yeah. I mean, I just love that story because it's one thing. It's like, yes, sure, he could be a dog lover, but the fact that he started saying, "I can see you really love your dog," right?
Yeah.
That he came
Yeah.
in with like
Yeah.
this opening for you to be able to hear something was certainly a gift.
Yeah. It really was. It really was.
And I like sort of this concept of feedback being a gift, and you mentioned it, and then the segue between sort of the radical candor type feedback, and then towards the end of your slides where you started to get a little bit more into the concepts of your other book, Just Work. And what we say is that feedback is a gift, but inaccurate feedback is a distraction.
Yeah.
And the way that you presented it as tainted feedback, right?
Yeah.
Is there bias, prejudice, bullying? I thought was also a very helpful phrase, because if you are the receiver of, bullying or prejudice, and even bias, right? It changes the way that we're able to hear feedback, receive feedback, and even if that um, feedback is accurate.
Yeah, I think that it's a really important point, and it's something I've been thinking more and more about because I think there are people in any culture who are underrepresented along some dimension tend to get more. If you think about feedback, there's some wheat and there's some chaff, and you want to take the wheat and discard the chaff. And I think when one is underrepresented along any dimension, you tend to get more chaff, less wheat.
Mhm.
And so it's easy to sort of block feedback because some of it is not just chaff, but painful. It's like blowing at you with a strong wind, and it can get in your eyes and get in your way. And so you want to make sure that you remain open to the wheat, but that you're figuring out how to get the chaff out of your way. And if you're giving feedback, you want to make sure that you're trying to take the steps you need to take in order to give more wheat, less chaff.
Well, I think on that, and there was something that you said earlier that actually started to stress me out a little bit. Because when I look at the radical candor framework, I definitely my default falls in the ruinous empathy, like so many of us.
Yes, me too.
And in some ways, where you were saying the feedback, right? You get it, you give it, you gauge it. Um, in your story of getting this feedback from your manager, where you sort of brushed off some of the lighter touch, and that it really sort of finally hit you at the, when you say, you sound stupid, for some people that would have fallen into the obnoxious aggression, right?
Yes.
Because it went too far down the caring personally. But for you,
Too far
it hit,
down the challenge
sorry,
direction.
too far down. Yeah. But for you, it hit the right note. And so now it almost sounds like what you're saying is, for us as managers, that 2x2 matrix needs to be adjusted depending on the person's ears who's on our team, or who.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not only the individual, but it's like, if I'm hungry, I'm a different person than if I'm not hungry, or if I'm tired, I'm a different person than if I'm not tired. And so you want to make sure that you're paying attention to how what you are saying is landing for the right person. And it is a little bit stressful, but how boring would it be if I could just email you all a script, and tell you exactly what to say? I don't know what you should say because I don't know you and I don't know who you're talking to. So I
Or our
can't give
levels
you,
of hunger, or
yeah. And I don't know how you're doing that day. It's unpredictable. It's very complicated. But on the one hand, it's very complicated. On the other hand, it's not very complicated. Like, if the other person is getting mad, it's tempting, by the way, to get mad back.
yeah.
And so, and maybe you do get mad, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're a lesser mortal. But when you're furious, try to get curious. Try to manage that by getting because it's hard to care personally about someone who's yelling at you.
Right.
So try to take an extra beat and to say, huh, I wonder why they're yelling at me. Like, what has happened that has made that, like, let's try to figure out what has made them so angry. And if the other person is sad, I don't know about you, but I like zoom over to ruin a sympathy, especially fast in the face of someone looking sad or even crying. But then you just leave them confused. Like, now you've upset them and confused them. What you want to do is take an extra beat to show the person that you care about them. And maybe you can take the time to solicit feedback. I must not have said that in the best possible way, because I know you can fix this, but I want to bring it up to help you fix it,
Right. Right. One of the things that you said in a previous conversation we had was that, typically, like, younger managers or newer managers fall a little bit more on that bullying side of the scale, oftentimes because they don't know better, or because we've
Yeah.
been conditioned for this, you have to be direct, you have to, come in hard. For all of the new managers out there who are, we're trying to figure out this world in so many different dimensions. We have new teams, as you mentioned, right? It is complex because we have different dynamics. What are the things that we should be really, we should pay really close attention to if this is our first management role, or if it's, one of the earlier times in our career where we have to be a people supervisor?
Yeah. I think the most important thing that new managers can do is to solicit feedback. So think about that go-to question, and then what do you do next? So no matter how good your question for soliciting feedback is, the other person is still going to feel uncomfortable, because in order to be a successful manager, you need to have a good relationship with each person on your team. But there are very few things that are more damaging to a good relationship than a power imbalance. So you've got to lay your power down and make yourself vulnerable. And one of the things you can do to do that is to solicit feedback, and then to embrace the discomfort. The other person still is not going to want to give you feedback. And the best thing you can do is close your mouth and count to 6. I only made it to 3 just there. I don't think I would have made it all the way to 6. 6 seconds is a long time. So let the person answer, and when they tell you the thing, you're probably going to feel defensive, because it's normal because you're a human being. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're shut down to feedback. It means you're human. So you want to sort of, in those moments, ask some follow-up questions, listen with the intent to understand, not to respond, and then you want to reward the candor, and you want to give the candor that you get sort of a big reward. So if they tell you about a problem and you agree, fix the problem. If you disagree with their feedback, look for that, whatever they said, that you probably don't disagree with 100% of what they said. Look for
Right.
that 5 or 10% of what they said that you can agree with, and give voice to that, so that the person knows that you're not shut down to feedback. And then say, I want to think about it and get back to you, and then offer them a respectful explanation of why you disagree. Very often that's the best reward for the candor.
But I mean, like, Kim, let's be super honest. Like, one, easier said than done.
Way easier said
Like,
than done.
but two, right, as a manager, right, what is my value add other than knowing more? Right. And so if I
But
am
that's not
vulnerable,
your, yeah, that's not your value add. The reason you're
okay.
a manager is because you have a job to do.
Mhm.
It's not because you know more. Often you're a manager because you care more, because your job is to sort of create a culture of feedback on a team.
Mhm.
So that starts with soliciting feedback. Like, what are the 3 things managers are responsible for? Culture of feedback, building a team. That means getting to know people, figuring out what motivates them at work, figuring out who needs to get promoted, figuring out where people want to go in their careers, so that you're giving them the right assignments that are motivating to them. So feedback, team, and last but not least, to achieve results. And the
I would
way,
add, sorry, I would add a fourth, which is also mobilizing resources.
yeah, but that's part of achieving results,
No,
is
okay. So,
is getting the right resources to the right place at the right time. And but you do not, I think it's really one of the mistakes that I made as a young manager, is to think that my job to get results was to tell people what to do. But telling people what to do doesn't work.
right, right.
Because the reason you've hired people is actually not because you know more. Maybe you have a breadth, but you hire people who know more than you do about a specific thing. As Steve Jobs said, we hire people who tell us what to do, not the
Mhm.
other way around. And so it's really important to remember that your job to get things done is to sort of let the people who work for you set their own goals, and then have a conversation with them, to have one-on-ones with them, to nurture new ideas with them, to create a process for making decisions, and to make as few decisions yourself as possible. You want to push decisions into the facts, and then to help people persuade others that those decisions are the right one, and then to learn
Mhm.
whether or not those were the right decisions, and to start that sort of, I call that the get stuff done wheel, to start the process all over again.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, right? And it, in some ways, right, I would take the long way to get here, but it wraps back to your story about Bob, which is, so many times as a young manager, I was worried that if my team was succeeding, then I didn't have a job anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Because if they could do
Yeah.
it, then what value am I adding? And I think some of our newer managers at InHomoco probably also have that same feeling of like, I'm going to be told that I'm just taking credit for other people's work. But coming back to the story of Bob, it was so clear, right, that everybody around sort of knew that this person wasn't pulling their weight, that they
Yeah.
weren't, and they were getting frustrated at you as the manager for not dealing with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it was your job.
Yeah, that is your job. Your job is not to do the work, but to help other people do the work, and to give people feedback when they're not doing the work, and also, most importantly, to solicit feedback. Like, am I doing the right things? Where am I involved where I shouldn't be involved, and where am I not involved that I should be involved. And being open to that feedback is the best. Like if you want to learn how to be a good boss, don't definitely don't go to business school, because you'll learn nothing about it there. You'll learn about marketing and finance
But
and
you'll know how to like go to a
operations.
happy hour and like work the room there.
Yeah, but yeah, you'll learn that. But the best way to learn how to be a good boss is to solicit feedback from
Hmm.
the people who work for you.
Hmm.
That's the real school of management right there.
So one of the comments that you made about, right, why it was important for you. Apparently, I've got some dog. Speaking of a dog lover, my dog has some feedback over here. I think for the mailman.
That's all right. It's all right. I can't even hear it, so we're good.
um, you know, it was sort of that concept of like, why did it matter for you, for your boss to give you feedback that, you were saying too many times, right? And part of it was because she cared for you, but also what you said was because it built trust.
Yeah.
And that's something that, what resonated with me was we had one entrepreneur we worked with in one of the refugee camps. And the business advisor who was first sent out to work with this woman came back from that trip sort of really emotionally drained.
Mm-hmm.
And she was emotionally drained because the entrepreneur said, let me tell you my life story. Because I need to trust you. I need to learn about your life story. I need to
Yeah.
trust you because this business is my livelihood.
Yeah.
And how can I trust that you're giving me the right advice if you don't know basically what the stakes are?
Yeah.
And that was something where it really was that sort of Covey quote of change happens at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily at the speed of KPIs, right? And so building that trust, for us as managers, but also for us as business advisors, for us as loan officers who are doing the right type of investment, for us as people who are working in communities where there's such an important premium of trust, this radical candor feedback and doing it sort of with empathy, with compassion, and also, with fairness, right, is something that's actually what I think sets us apart and what's the opportunity for even more growth.
Yeah, and taking the time to listen to people's stories is the job. That
Mhm.
is that is not an extracurricular. That is something that I learned when I had started a software company. It was a small startup. And I came in, I had to make an important pricing decision that morning.
Mm.
And I'd set aside 2 hours to do it. And I walked in, and there was a guy on my team who had a major health issue, and he came up and wanted to talk about it, and I knew, I couldn't just brush him off, so I talked to him. And then I was walking to my desk, and I walked by another guy whose child was in the hospital,
Mm.
and I knew I couldn't just say, how's it going, because I knew how it was going. His life was
Right.
a living hell.
Mm.
So I spent some time talking to him. And then I passed by a third person whose child had just won, his daughter had just won like the best mathematician of New York City. And now it was like having sort of emotional whiplash from sympathy to celebration. And by the time I got to my desk, I was wrung out. I
Mm.
was emotionally exhausted. And I called my manager and I said, am I a therapist or a CEO? And she
Mhm.
said, this is called management and it is your job. And I was like, oh, okay. And I think it's really important to remember that emotional labor, it's real labor. So
Yeah.
give yourself what you need to do to be able to do that labor. But that is the job, that building trust. That is a huge part of the job.
And as a result, do you think that for organizations like ours, where we're able to build, a much bigger people and culture department and have sort of more resources, like, should we be really intentional about that element of management training or even support for managers, that the sort of the emotional toll that takes as we grow our teams?
Yes, absolutely. And teaching people how to care for one another that is a skill that can be taught. I learned this when I was, again, when I was working at Google. There was a guy working for me, Russ Laraway, and Russ came to me and he said, I want to fly all the managers on my team from all over the world. So it's like 150 people from 15 different countries. I'm going to fly them to California and teach them how to have get to know you conversations. And at first I said, that is ridiculous. I mean, and we were working at Google, like money was blowing out of the air conditioning vents, like, it felt like such a waste of money. And I at first said no, and he persuaded me that we should do it. And he said, one of your jobs as a leader is to teach other leaders to care for one another. And one way you can do that is to care yourself. You can walk the talk, but it's also really important because these get to know you conversations, like a lot of people, one of the things that Russ recommended was to start having a conversation, starting with kindergarten, tell me about your life. And a lot of people love that question, but there were some people on the team who would rather poke a sharp stick in their eye than talk about their childhood with their manager. And it's important to learn how to, like, part of caring personally is to to respect people's boundaries and
Right.
understand what they want to talk about and what they don't want to talk about. It's not about getting creepily personal. And it's interesting, Russ had learned this. You'll never guess where he learned about how important it is to teach people to care. In the
Well, certainly.
Marines, in the US Marine. Like, I did not know that the touchy-feely training in the Marines was such a big part.
But a place that arguably needs to have a lot of trust.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're almost at time. If I can have two more questions. How does your career look different if you discovered this wonderful 2x2 matrix when you were in the diamond cutting business?
Oh my goodness. I would have I would have had a lot of feedback for one of the worst experiences was the job I took after that. I was working at a tech startup, and there was an inexperienced CEO, to be fair to him. But we had to do layoffs, which is an unfortunate, and I think for business reasons, we really did have to do the layoffs. But the way he did it was so cruel to people. And I did not stand up for them the way I should have. When I was at Juice Software, there was a board member who was really cruel to people at the company. And I was not the shit umbrella that I should have been for them. And I didn't give him the feedback that I should have given him. So there are so many times when I regret not having been radically candid. And I think I would have been more successful. I think Juice may have worked Juice failed in the end, the software company, in part because of this Bob situation. But there were a million other times when I was not radically candid at that company. So I think I would have been happier, and I think I would have been more successful if I had learned this earlier in my career.
Should have, could have, would have.
Yeah, well, that's why I wrote the book, so that other people can learn the easy way what I had to learn the hard way.
Well, Kim, I'm about to put words in your mouth, so please stop me if I put too many words in my mouth. But you have always been so generous with us, and have always been willing to come back and do even more talks with us in the future. What would you like to see the next time you come and talk with us in several months or however long that is? Like, for this conversation to have really landed, what is the kind of feedback that I will be able to give that would make you so happy, that says, we took this lesson, here's how we've implemented, and here's how things are moving in a different direction?
If everyone who listens to this, if everyone who's a manager in your orbit is having one-on-one meetings with each of their direct reports once a week and soliciting feedback and learning something and rewarding that candor, that would be amazing. But the other thing, failing that, is if you all come back to me and say, we tried this and it did not work, and here's why, that would teach me something really important. So radical candor on radical candor would be great. But in an ideal world, you try the soliciting feedback thing and it works.
Right.
But
yet,
the world is not ideal, as we all know.
No, but I'm imagining with that second piece that there probably haven't been too many examples that you've gotten that have said this is where soliciting feedback has really failed.
No, there are times when people have tried to solicit feedback and they haven't gotten it, so they want to know how to push harder. And there are times, where they solicit feedback and they get a bunch of bias, prejudice, or bullying. And so, like, that's why I wrote Just Work, to help people know how to deal with that.
Oh. Well, I am super grateful on behalf of all of us in East Africa and for everybody else who's listening. I mean, it's always such a delight to learn from you, Kim. I can't read your work enough. And I always walk away with something where what I could do better. I mean, even just my own sort of self-reflection of saying, even today, right, I still fall a little bit too much on the ruinous empathy.
Yeah, me too. So, and I wrote the book.
Right.
None of us are perfect.
Right, but in ways to sort of solicit feedback, to give it, to gauge it, but then also to encourage it. And this is sort of that last step of having the chance to encourage more and more people to do that. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your work, and also for continuing to challenge yourself, right? To see how Radical Candor then turned into Just Work that continues to build this this world of even better managers, whether we're at a big organization, a medium one, or even if we're running our own. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank all of you who are watching for the work you're doing. And I hope one day to visit you there in East Africa.
Well, you are welcome anytime. We'd love to have you. And yeah, I will sign off now, but thank you so much. And we look forward to another conversation again soon.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks,
Take
Kim.
care.
All right. Take
Thank you.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.